One. All right. Very honored to have Matt Taibbi here. Matt, great to have you back. Actually, the
I
last time you
also
were on, it was your internet that was the problem, which is shocking to me because nobody has worse internet than I do. But anyway, so between the two of us, this should be an interesting show. You wrote this on your Substack, just FYI to everybody, go follow Matt, Racket News on Substack. And this is the article on Missouri v. Biden and the New Abnormal, interview with Dr. Aaron Kheriaty. I think most of my viewers are familiar with this case. It's, I think personally, a landmark free speech case. We'll see what happens. It's related to basically the government pressure and just affiliation, I guess, with big tech companies and telling them what they should suppress or what they should allow or how to fix the algorithm so that they promote certain narratives over others. And Dr. Kheriaty, many of my viewers know, was on my podcast back when he was like a no-name 2 years ago in 2021. And it was that video that got taken down by YouTube as medical misinformation. The radical thing he was saying at the time was that he had natural immunity and shouldn't be forced to get the COVID vaccine. That's how radical that statement was. Like, we could not allow people to hear that. My bosses at the Department of Natural Resources saw it, said that I couldn't interview people like him anymore if I wanted to keep my job, even though it was on my personal time. And they have nothing to even do with health. So I don't even know why, it's not like there's a State Department of Health or anything. But anyway, so that loss led to the termination of my job, my day job, because I refused to comply. It was a whole, it changed my life. That interview and then being a part of this case now, because my video with him is one of his points of censorship in this big case that's now going to the Supreme Court. So you wrote this article about it. I'm just curious, like, big picture, first question. To me, the fact, I was just saying this to my husband yesterday, the fact that the government is fighting this all the way to SCOTUS, they're not trying to deny that they do this. What they're saying, if I understand correctly, is we should be able to do it. The fact that they're fighting this all the way to the high court is this. And we're saying we should be allowed to legally. Am I understanding this correctly? They're not saying we aren't doing this.
Not exactly. Yeah. That's more or less the case. I haven't seen them in any instance concede, for instance, that they were violating the First Amendment. But they do say things like, we can't be constrained from using the bully pulpit, from speaking on matters of public concern, from communicating. They talk a lot about the restrictions on their own First Amendment rights. So they've gone from a posture of denying that there's anything untoward that happened or anything controversial to essentially accepting the evidence that's now sort of overwhelming in the case and saying, well, look, this is not an example of a First Amendment violation. This is just the bully pulpit. This is just, it's just the government encouraging the platforms to do the right thing. And so far, judges are not buying those arguments.
I'm curious what you think about this. As somebody who worked on a communications team for the government, I kind of question the purpose, or even I'm guessing they're legal, but it just seems really weird to me. Like, I look at the White House press conferences, for instance, and it's weird to me that taxpayers pay a significant amount of money for communications teams that spin the truth and are like there specifically to, I think in a lot of ways, manipulate the public for the elected official. Like, it's your own PR firm. Like, we finance a PR firm. And this is sort of an extension of that, because it's the communications teams often, or maybe it's even higher ups, obviously, like when it comes to the really like high level narrative pushing. But what do you think about that? I just thought of that. Like, it just seems like such a weird thing that we fund these. I don't know how that dates back. Like, historically, you know a lot more about the history of all this stuff than I do. Was it always that way when somebody had a press secretary that they were paid basically to just spin things for these agencies? Or were they, like, to me, the best case scenario would be, we just pay you to do the FOIAs. That's all. You just you know what I mean? Like, we just put the FOIAs together. And it took 2 years for the NIH to get back to me recently and tell me that my FOIA request was too broad about funding between Gates and the NIH and everything. And they just closed my request after 2 years, and that was it. But they spend so much time, on press conferences and all this other stuff, trying to gather agenda making talking points instead of just, I don't know, giving us the facts. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's been an evolution over a long period of time. I'm by no means an expert in this subject, but I think if you go back, you'd probably find the roots of what you're talking about, which is more or less, the official propaganda. It starts around World War I for most Western countries. When they start actually pouring resources into having offices that do nothing but that, or having people who are responsible entirely for, crafting the image and the media response to government policies. And I don't think governments necessarily should be begrudged the ability to try to sell their policies to the public in the best light possible. I think it got started to get a little weird, though, in the 21st century. And I was there for some of this when they started to introduce concepts like the spin room. And there was this weird sort of symbiotic relationship between journalists and officials, where it was this idea that somewhere between what the government says and what the public hears, there's going to be this massaging of the facts in such a way that we're gonna produce a narrative together. The media and the government is going to work together to produce a narrative that's going to be the most effective and most appropriate. You started to see that happening, and I think that's intensely weird. And we saw that all throughout the Twitter files and all throughout this case, where journalists and people at the platforms and government, they're all kind of on the same team trying to decide, what the public gets to see. And I'm not sure that's the right way to organize things socially.
Okay. Let me ask you about media, since you brought up, we're talking about journalists specifically working with the government. What's your thought on this case, this Missouri v. Biden case, continuing to move up, and really it's fascinating to see how many judges, like you said, have agreed that this seems to violate the First Amendment. But where are all the journalists? I mean, you're the only person who's reached out to me, as I'm trying to rack my memory, but I think you're the only journalist who has reached out to say, like, hey, were you really, like, does this really happen? Like, your video was taken down by YouTube with Cariotti, like, you lost your day job. Like, I was an Emmy award winning journalist. Like, I was totally one of them. I was in the world, and then I left, and this all happened, and it's like we never knew Allison. She's just like our crazy redheaded stepsister we just like to forget about.
Right. Well, look, your story is important for, I think, several reasons, right? You had a state job, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The interview that you did was with a doctor who didn't say anything that was factually incorrect. He didn't offer any misinformation. In retrospect, all he was doing was expressing a credentialed, informed policy disagreement. And here we have essentially, in your case, a State Department punishing you for expressing your right, your freedom, your First Amendment rights, both as a person and as a journalist, and indirectly, Dr. Cariotti, who ends up becoming a plaintiff in this case. If I were I am a journalist covering this story. This is absolutely crucial background to understanding the genesis of this Supreme Court, well, what's now a Supreme Court case. And for nobody to have called you, that tells you a little bit about how journalists are looking at this thing. Like, they don't even want to know what the details are. They've already gotten their marching papers on what they think. So I guess it's not important.
Yeah, and just big picture, like RTDNA, the Murrows, gosh, what's the Society of Professional Journalists? What's the one that's in the Poynter Institute? I don't see any of these journalism organizations like following this case very closely. Not necessarily to even advocate for it, but just to understand what's going on here. Do you think it would be different if it if it had something that aligned more with the sort of neoliberal way of looking at the world. I mean, I'm just trying to think like if it had something to do with racism or
No, I don't
women's
really.
rights or something. I mean, do you think then they would care if
Maybe,
Trump was in office?
maybe, but see, one of the things that we found in the Twitter files was that a lot of the civil society organizations that we once relied on to advocate for journalists' rights have kind of been swallowed up by this new mission, which is really about quote unquote anti-disinformation. So the Poynter Institute is a major sponsor of fact checking and anti-disinformation type activities. So they're sort of on that side of the line. They're not likely to look upon this case as something, where they feel like they need to advocate for the rights of people to have free speech or for journalists to speak up. There are a few organizations that I've seen that don't seem to be part of that whole mechanism, right? Like the Committee to Protect Journalists is one. But the traditional organizations that you would expect to be there in this situation, like for instance, I was an intern at the Village Voice in the 80s, so I had a desk next to Nat Hentoff, who was like the big free speech reporter for decades in America. And every article that he wrote was swallowed up by every one of these organizations. Like, they were all his sources. There just aren't a whole lot of those organizations left now. There's sort of FIRE, which does some of this work, but mostly no. They're not going to be on the side of the free speech advocates anymore.
Okay, I am looking up an article that I gotta get back on screen here, show you in a second, Matt, because it was written by somebody at The Guardian, I think, that is a repeat. Why am I not back on screen? Here we go. It was a repeat of an article I remember reading in 2016 by the New York Times. The headline was something like Trump is challenging our
Jim
norms of
Rittenberg.
objectivity.
Mhm.
Okay. And that did seem like that was like it for me anyway, and I was still in television news at the time. That was a distinctive shift. This idea that we have an existential threat, and so as journalists, we have to do journalism differently. I mean, we can't like show both sides or whatever. We have to advocate for something. And then this new idea too that democracy is under attack or is like going the way of the white buffalo, which is funny because I would say that I might agree with them on that, but for totally different reasons. You know what I mean? Like I actually do believe like the Constitution is under attack and everything, but not because of like January 6th, So I'm like that I see it very differently. Anyway, let me tell people about some wine real fast. This is Extremist Altitude wine. This is uncensored wine. Actually, it's unfiltered, but it's kind of the same thing. It's from very remote regions of Argentina. You cannot buy it at the grocery store. Small family farms. One of the vineyards is over 200 years old. It's the oldest vineyard in Argentina. One is the third highest vineyard in the world. And it is a great way to support my work. Bonner Wine has been with me since the beginning, since the Cariotti video. Everybody since Cariotti's had to listen to me promote the wine. They probably want to drink after listening to this because they're just over the wine promos, but that's okay because you can go to Allison Wine Promo. And remember, when you're reading through Supreme Court cases, it's very important to have something good to drink. And it'll probably be more interesting if you have a couple glasses Allison Wine Promo. You get 50% off the wine and 50% off shipping, and it is a great way to support my work. It also makes for a great gift. We've got to have some kind of holiday coming up. Halloween. Get it for Halloween. All right. And then if you want to mix that with something very healthy for you, you can put a little bit of this Field of Greens superfood powder I've got right here. It's organic superfood powder. They take the whole fruit and vegetable, flash freeze it, and grind it up. And 2 scoops of this right here, 2 scoops of this in some water. I shake it up. I got my fruits and vegetables for the day. They're physician formulated for specific immune function, and they actually taste pretty good. So if your garden is being attacked by rampant Florida predators like mine is, or you just don't know how to grow any food, which is also my problem, or you're going into winter, which doesn't ever happen really here in Florida, but that we have other problems. You can go to fieldofgreens.com and enter promo code Allison. You get 15% off your first order. They got a bunch of stuff. They even have snack bars made with honey instead of sugar, which I also really like. So fieldofgreens.com and promo code Allison, 1L, 15% off your first order. Okay. Matt, since we're talking about, I want to go over to locals real fast because there was somebody who was asking specifically about your testifying before Congress. And the question was, surprised at how the Democrats treated you during the congressional hearing. Any thoughts on that? And also, didn't you have somebody show up at your house or something, like a federal agency? Okay, can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just to answer those in order, I was surprised. I was, you know, I was there to talk about the Twitter files, so I prepared quite a lot for what I expected to be hostile questioning, but I expected the questioning to be about the substance of the discussion, namely, you know, were there really outright demands from government agencies to censor information, what kinds of people were being flagged, that kind of thing. Instead, it was just like almost entirely ad hominem attacks on my character and Michael Schellenberger's character, and it got really strange. I mean, there was some of it was like red baiting stuff where the congressman from New York, Dan Goldman, was holding up one of Robert Mueller's indictments and saying, "Do you agree with this?" And I was thinking, what does this have to do with, you know, internet censorship? And
why do you think they have these congressional hearings? I mean, are they really? They seem so theatrical to me. Are they really purposeful to like actually gain information that leads to anything?
Well, that one was actually held by Jim Jordan on the Republican side, and for their purposes, I think that hearing accomplished quite a lot, because what people ended up seeing was the incredibly hostile way that people were behaving towards Michael and myself, and we're lifelong Democrats, both of us, until recently, anyway. And I'm an independent now, but I'm not a Republican, certainly. And they were just absolutely vicious. I mean, the tenor of the whole thing was like straight out of the old HUAC hearings. And I think that had a lot to do with propagandizing Democratic Party attitudes towards free speech in a negative way. So, those hearings can accomplish some things in that way too.
Mm-hmm.
About the IRS, yeah, just briefly.
Yeah, talk about that. That
was. I got home from that experience. I took a train home to Jersey that night, and when I got home, my wife showed me a little note on the door that said that the IRS had been at the house while I was testifying, and it took a little while. We eventually found out that they had opened a case on me on Christmas Eve of last year, which happened to be the day that I was dropping probably the most dangerous Twitter file story. It was also a Saturday, so make of that what you will. But it was kind of a non-issue, and the fact that I was under investigation, from the same day of a major Twitter file story was a little strange.
Do you think that is a tactic to scare you?
I think more likely it's a tactic to scare future reporters. I mean, with somebody like me or Glenn Greenwald, the die has already been cast. Like we've already had everything thrown at us, so it's not likely that I'm going to be upset or intimidated, or my family is going to suddenly realize, wow, what a bad deal we've got. Being linked to this person who's always getting in trouble. Like they knew that 15 years ago. But for a young reporter starting out, these kinds of things can be, they can force you to make some decisions. Like, do I want to get into a situation where I'm going to have to make my money outside of the framework of conventional journalism? And you know this, that's a tough decision for people to make. Like, going it on your own is not fun, right?
Yeah. So. Though I will say, my personal experience was less so the person who was awake but nervous about the repercussions, and more the person who maybe even subconsciously was pressured to conform. I mean, I didn't know very many people who were like awake to this stuff, but just were nervous. What would the bosses say? I knew a lot of people that were just basically, they just agreed with a lot of the stuff. And I do have friends, I think I have a couple friends who are still in the business who I wouldn't say they necessarily like see the real value of stuff like, your work and like the Missouri v. Biden case, for instance, but they would still be glad you're around. I mean, they would still be glad you're around, but they wouldn't be someone who's going to like be out there holding a sign for you.
Right.
But they're still the minority. I mean, the vast majority of the this is just anecdotal, but the vast majority of the journalists that like I knew in the mainstream world were there because they just didn't see anything egregiously wrong with. I mean, they would go to the bars, I guess, and complain about how they didn't have time to do their story, but they wouldn't carry that the next step farther, which is, oh, maybe our journalism then sucks. I mean, maybe we're getting things wrong, because we don't have
Right.
time to do our work, or, maybe the whole fake news thing is right. And maybe they're right. They would get so defensive about that criticism, but yet with each other, they would admit that there's something very wrong with the industry. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I guess I was one of those people too at the time. When I started to wake up, eventually that led to I just had to quit. I realized I couldn't stay in the system. It was never going to change. The system wasn't going to change. And I couldn't keep doing what I was doing, because now I was realizing that I was going to become a liar instead of somebody who was just ignorant. Now I was waking up to this. So now I'm going to be a liar. So I can't do that anymore. So I had to get out. But I don't think most of them are necessarily lying, because I don't think they're awake.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, if you were probably like most of us, you come up through a certain organization, a certain system. You have friends, you have colleagues, and it all makes sense to you. And it's not an easy thing psychologically to suddenly wake up one morning and see the whole thing as deeply problematic. It happens over a period of time. For me, this whole journey started with the stupid Russiagate story, where I didn't even have particularly strong feelings about it at first. But, I thought, man, there's something not quite right about the way they're reporting that thing. And I'm being asked to say things about this that I can't really agree with. And what's the deal with that? And I just had an odd sense that there was something off about the whole thing. And I think there are a lot of people in the business who are in that position where they're uncomfortable about something. They don't know exactly what it is, and then it becomes clearer over time what that thing is. And eventually you just have to make a yes or no decision about whether you're going to continue to do it. But it's or you're forced out, before you get to make that decision yourself.
Yeah, right. I mean, they just make it like so uncomfortable for you that you're like, I don't know. For me, what ended up happening was I tried to pitch an idea that would allow me to be more digital and less TV, because the TV was really a problem. That's a presentation problem, because you have to keep your story to less than 90 seconds. I was covering a very complex topic, which is the environment, on a day-to-day basis. And by the time I had been doing the environment for like 4 years, I had gained enough competency in the topic to realize what I didn't know and how politicized a topic it really was. Then I was like very uncomfortable going on television saying these are the two sides, because the two sides could also just be equally wrong and just fighting with each other and making everything, you know what I mean? I mean, it didn't, to me, it wasn't good enough to just like get a Republican and get a Democrat, because I didn't trust either one of them. And so anyway, then I just said, well, I'll just start covering stupid stories that like have no impact, because then at least I don't feel like I'm going to be used by people. But then I was like, well, this is boring. I don't want to do this anymore. And then my bosses wanted me like live at 6:30 outside a pizza restaurant where they were switching from plastic water bottles to boxed paper water. And I was like, I'm done. I'm just done being live at 6:30 on like switching to boxed water. I just, you know what I mean? Like, I'm done. Okay, this is the article that I was going to show you. With democracy on the ballot.
The press must change its ways. Is this the Margaret Sullivan story?
Exactly what the New York Times was running in 2016. And I mean, it goes back to Trump and everything. But yeah, it basically, makes the case that like Biden is he is our protector of democracy, and he may not be perfect, but and then they blame the media too. I mean, they're blaming the media for going after clickbait, but yeah, they turning Biden's age into a scandal, and that's a problem. And I don't know. It's just fascinating because like it's just a repeat of where we were back in 2016, and they don't see any of the problems that like you and I have identified with like constitutional civil liberties and everything over the last few years. It's like Trump is the big issue again, and I don't know. We just have to do journalism differently because we have this historic existential threat.
So, but this is where they got into so much trouble, though, Allison. I think because the Rutenberg piece from 2016, which was hugely influential in the business, and was called "Trump is Testing the Norms of Objectivity in Journalism." It ended with this kind of clarion call, which is, yes, it's important to be true, but journalists also have to be true to the facts in a way. What's the word? In a way that will stand up to history's judgment. So, the old responsibility of the journalist was, okay, is it true? We'll put it out there. Like, it's not our job to, make sense of things for you necessarily, or to decide how you should think about things. What we do is we're supposed to just dig things up, make sure that they're correct, put them out there in a way that's understandable, and then it's the audience's job to decipher what to do with that. What these pieces by Sullivan and Rutenberg are saying is that that's not enough. We have to not only put the stuff out, we have to tell you what the correct psychological, political response to these facts is. And that's what it's directly relevant to the Heriati stuff, because here's a guy who was not factually incorrect. He didn't say anything that was wrong, but narratively, it was in a direction that the media collectively had decided was incorrect, which was the policy response is lockdown, and vaccination is the only way out, and natural immunity, well, we can't focus on that because then otherwise people won't get their shot if they've already had the disease. And so you are prohibited from saying all these true things, which is basically an expression of distrust in the public and in audiences. It's telling them, we don't think you're grown up enough to handle this stuff. You can't handle the truth. It's literally that. And that is so insulting. And it's the reason why people hate journalists. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out, is it?
Yeah, right. No, you're totally right. Yeah, but it's still like, I think then the attitude, it's even more emboldening when that happens, because it's like a parent who then goes, yep, see, I knew you weren't going to like me when I took that lollipop away from you, but trust me, I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
Here's
That's
the
right.
apple. And it's like, it's more emboldening, I think, from that standpoint. So it doesn't do what we think it would do, which would be like, oh, see, it's humbling you all to see that the public doesn't trust you. It's like, they like it. That's like proof positive they're on the right track. When the wrong people, they look at it like that inverse endorsement, when the wrong people dislike you, then you think that's a compliment. This is the way they look at it.
Which is totally nuts to me, because and my father was a journalist. I grew up in the era when reporters all imagined themselves to be kind of on the side of ordinary people, even if they weren't. Like that was the vibe around journalism in the 70s, say, right, or early 80s. And politicians, rich people, all those folks, they were all to be distrusted. They were, the whole idea was to kind of stick it to those folks on behalf of the public, or to at least advocate on behalf of the public. Now they don't see that things like that at all. Socially, they're the same people as the people they're reporting on, and the unreliable group that in their eyes is the general public. They're the ones who are dangerous, who are the bearers of threats, who are generating fake news stories, who are transmitting, retweeting foreign interference, and all those things. They're not critical of people in power unless it's Donald Trump, right? And it's not a role that people see that as almost like a clerical role as opposed to a journalistic role.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to take a couple quick questions over on locals, everybody. But real fast, I'm going to the Weston A. Price food of all foodie conferences coming up in a month. If you would like to support the travel budget, you can go to givesendgo.com/Allison2Wise Traditions. Allison with one L, the number 2, Wise Traditions. If we're coming up on the deadline, but if we raise enough, a little more, going to bring the whole family. My husband helps with the technical stuff, so it'll probably be a little bit of a better production. And then the 2 producers are going to come along. Should be fun. Otherwise, it's just me, and we're going to have some great interviews. Should be really interesting. It's got all kinds of people, along with like homesteaders, people like Joe Salatin, though I don't think he's talking this time, Dr. Tom Cowan, Catherine Austin Fitz, Naomi Wolf, lots of really interesting people. So hopefully I got a press pass, and hopefully we'll bring some good interviews. So you can go support that over there. I am going to say goodbye to everybody here on YouTube. Matt, anything before we're going to stay on the other platforms? Just heads up, everyone, we'll be on Locals, Rockfin, and Rumble. But any final, like where you can find me, all that good stuff, Matt, for everybody that's still watching on YouTube?
Oh, yeah, I'm at www.racket.news or taibbi.substack.com. And yeah.
Here we go. Okay, great. Okay, thanks everybody on YouTube. We will see you over on the other platforms.